Okay, this is Erin Olson. She is a friend and coworker of my sister's, and I will be cooking challah bread with her, or baking.
And celebrating the Shabbat. We're going to usher in Shabbat with you.
Oh. Yeah. Okay. So, where were you born and raised?
North Carolina, right in the center.
Well, and
In Greensboro.
did you have a big family?
Nope, only child.
You were the only child.
It was not intended, but yeah, I was the only child. The others just didn't come.
Did you grow up kosher?
No.
You didn't?
No, I I didn't find out I was Jewish until I was 21, when I was 21. And I'd always felt really drawn to understand Jewish stuff. And the very first class I took in college was Biblical Hebrew. And there were a lot of Jewish kids in the class, you know, and I would, you know, usher in Shabbat with them and celebrate Pesach, Passover, and Hanukkah, you know. We would do things together, but I thought I was just doing it as an outsider. And then I'd been diagnosed with a disease when I was 15. But it wasn't until my doctor that I had while I was at the university asked if I would do a presentation for the food and nutrition class there, just so they could ask me questions about living with this digestive disease. It's a genetic disease, a genetic disorder. And I said, sure, yeah, I'll answer questions. And he stands up to kind of introduce the disease, and the first thing he says is that it's a genetic Ashkenazi Jew disease. And I'm like, no, because at the time I'd been studying Hebrew for 3 or 4 years, and I was actually teaching introductory Hebrew, but I really had never considered the possibility of being Jewish because I was raised Christian, and my grandmas were very Christian, and so I had never really considered it. So I went home to my mom after that, and she's like, well, maybe that would explain it, because we're from Poland, but we've never been able to find any records of our ancestors immigrating. And so we talked with my great-grandmother, and she was like, yeah. Yeah, that was a family secret, because we moved to South Carolina, and my family had fled persecution in Poland, and they didn't want persecution in South Carolina. So that's why it was this big family secret, and a disease unearthed it.
Wow.
But yeah, so a couple months later, I went to Jerusalem, to live in Jerusalem, and lived there. I've lived there twice. And I speak Hebrew. I taught Hebrew at university for 5 years. So I'm actually, it's not all that weird, in all honesty. There's a really large segment of American Jewry that is trying to find their Jewish identity, and a lot of them will do it linguistically. They'll do it by learning Hebrew, or by learning Arabic, because they live in the Middle East because they want to know the Palestinian side of things. So I actually find that there's a lot of people like me that did not practice Judaism when they were younger, but then decided they wanted to, and kind of their door in happens at university.
Wow.
Kind of strange, huh? Yeah.
Very.
But ever since then, we've celebrated, and we do keep kosher, but we keep kosher kind of funny. We keep kosher because we're vegetarians. So it's really straightforward to keep kosher, because the fundamental precept is that you're not mixing meat with the mother's milk. So the idea is that, you know, if you had a cow, as would be really typical anciently, if you had a cow and she had a calf, if you were eating that calf, the premise is that you would be sure that that calf was not kept in its mother's milk, which is a beautiful ethic. Of course that shouldn't happen. That would just be violating a sacred trust of mother and child. So, but we don't have any meat to mix. So, likewise, we eat fish, but we don't eat shellfish. So pretty much we're kosher because we don't eat the problematic foods at all. But we aren't kosher in that the cheese that I buy is not rabbinate approved or anything. I just really see that as like a marketing scam. It takes a huge amount of money to become kosher. So we make sure we use products that would be certified kosher if they paid the money for it. So we make sure we use things with kosher gelatin. Like we do kosher gelatin marshmallows, but it doesn't have the rabbinic stamp on it, you know, stuff like this. So I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is one of the more progressive cities of the South. It's like where the sit-ins happened at Woolworths in the 70s, and we have a lot of pride in being diverse. So that helped, because at the time I was going to a high school that had other Jews there that were vocally Jews. So that helped. But I think the biggest trick is my grandfather. My grandfather's a member of the KKK, and my grandmother specifically said, do not tell him it could end our marriage. So he still doesn't know. And we adopted 2 daughters from Africa and warned him by 5 years that it was happening. You know, this will happen. We are going to adopt from Africa. And he said, you know, I don't know that I can ever leave them. But we took them last February to meet him. Took about 2 days before he'd be in the same room with them, but he gave them a hug as they left. So I guess what I'm saying is it's a lot more personal than even just the Bible Belt of the South. It's my own family is very racist. And the idea that they could be Jewish is just anathema to them. But, you know, everybody says that if Hitler had to abide by his rules of length of nose and size of ears, he would have been slaughtered in the shower, too. So, yeah, the people that hate the most are the ones that are of that ethnicity, it seems.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Christian and people never had answers for why things were written like they were in the Old Testament, and the Tanakh is how we say it in Hebrew. We don't call it the Old Testament because we don't believe in the New Testament, right? But nobody was satisfying. They'd be like, I don't know. Like, that's just the weird old stuff. And so the first thing I studied was Biblical Hebrew, so I could take an associate class that was like an honors Old Testament class. An honors Old Testament literature, but you had to know Hebrew to take it. So it was just the mystery of it. Nobody really got it. You know, people would like read Genesis and then skip everything else. And, I just wanted to know what it meant. So I was just drawn to it. Okay, so my favorite thing about Passover is not actually the food, it's the preparing the house before the food, which I don't know if you studied about this or not. But since we don't have the ancient temple on the earth any longer, I mean, we have one wall of the exterior wall that's there that people worship at, right? We don't have the temple any longer. The switch that kind of happened after the loss of the temple was that the home had to be the temple. And so no longer would you expect the Shekinah or the presence of God to be at the temple. You would invite it into your home. So that's what we do on Friday nights. We invite the Shekinah into our home. That's why we light the candles. To say, okay, the presence of God needs to be here in our home because we are the camp of Israel, because there is no gathering place for us any longer. So at Passover, it's even stronger. So you want to create the vessels of your house to have the same ritual purity that the ancient temple vessels would have. And so, I mean, most households will have an entire different set. Not most households. Orthodox households would have a whole other set of dishes for Passover. And we don't do that because that's just insane. I don't have enough cabinets for it. But what we do is we take this gigantic pot and we take a blowtorch to it. And we ritually purify the gigantic pot. And then we take 4 stones that are significant to us from the Holy Land, and we put them in the water, and we make a water bath. And all of the dishes, and all of the forks, and all of the knives, and all of the pots, and everything we're going to use for the time of Passover, we ritually immerse, and we make clean. And we deeply clean all of the cabinets as well. So in that, we're making this zone of holiness. Now, we're not delusional. I mean, we know there's still germs. It's not that. It's just this attempt to have an act to say, I wish we still had the temple. You know, I wish we still had that. And since we don't, we're going to make a kitchen feel like it, so our kids will know what it would have felt like to serve in the temple, you know? So the food itself is pretty nasty at Passover. I mean, it's supposed to be bitter, right? You're supposed to remember how miserable our ancestors were suffering in the wilderness. So you have the horseradish, you have, but even the stuff that's not nasty, even not the maror, even the charoset, which is usually like walnuts and a little bit of wine and raisins. Even that is not the most delicious thing. And matzah is the bread of our affliction. I mean, it's not delicious, okay? This is not manna. You're going to have manna tonight. You have matzah during Passover. It's the most tasteless cracker possible. And so the food itself isn't delicious. It's the fact that you're in holy space with your ancestors, and you're celebrating something they've celebrated for 3,200 years, and that you're still enacting it. It's still happening. And but the food is strange, but not yummy. And it's not supposed to be. But it's different. On Shabbat, the food is yummy. It's the manna from heaven. So when the children of Israel were wandering in the desert, they would be given manna when they didn't have food. And we don't know what manna is. Manna means, we think it means, what is this? Ma is what, and na is please. Like, what's this, please, God? What in the world are you giving us? Academics, they say that it was like the secretion of an exoskeleton off of a bug, maybe. Yum, Or maybe it was some fungus that was growing in the desert that they found. Or maybe it was pigeons that dive-bombed the camp of Israel and they ate the pigeons. We don't know what it was. But the traditional image of it is kind of like this bread that's floating from heaven. So the day before the Sabbath, they would gather 2 loaves. So they wouldn't have to gather anything on the Sabbath. And so we have 2 loaves of challah to remember the miracles that come out of the skies from heaven. And it's delicious. It's delicious, delicious. And I'm actually gluten intolerant and only eat bread for challah. That's it. That's the only bread I eat. And you can make gluten free with challah. You can. It's just not as good. But and then typically it's just really gentle and soft foods that you just want to gather and hold hands with your family. So usually it's chicken soup, but we're vegetarian, so we're doing salmon stew tonight. But we're also going to make you matzo ball soup, just because you should experience matzah, even though it's not Passover. Matzo ball soup doesn't taste bad, because it's the matzah that's nasty, but with herbs, so it's okay. But I got into, for a while when I was teaching Hebrew, my students were really into the foods. You know, they really wanted to have a recipe for every holiday, and so we really got into it. And I think the funnest thing is that I would have students that were from Africa, and students that, you know, were like Moroccan Jews, and students that were from Ethiopia, they're Ethiopian Jews, and students that were Middle Eastern, that were more Arabs. They were Mizrahi Jews, and the foods are so divergent depending on where you're from. So my ancestry, I thought, was all Ashkenazi Jewish, but then I did some fun romantic National Geographic blood tests, and it turns out I'm more Spanish Jew than anything. But just the foods are so radically different, and the requirements are so different. So in Passover, the things that you're not allowed to eat as an Ashkenazi is pretty much just any wheat products or anything that can sprout. So you don't eat rice, and you don't eat corn, and you don't eat beans. But if you're a Sephardic Jew, you totally eat rice and beans. I mean, what else are you going to eat? You know, you just don't eat wheat products. So even the rules on the communities are so varied that it makes all the dishes totally different.
First thing you want to do is take this and cut it in half, and then cut the halves in half.
Okay.
All right.
Do you follow a recipe at all, or you just wing it?
Yeah, no, I have a recipe, but
Yeah.
I don't need it anymore. We make
You
it
know it so
small.
much?
Yeah.
Is your family Jewish?
Nope.
No.
I mean,
You?
not since I met my wife. we've,
Oh, like this?
yeah. Now, yeah, here. Now you actually want to separate it all the way. So.
So bad at cooking. The worst.
You can grab one, and what I do, I start by rolling it like this, okay, on both sides.
Stop playing with the door now.
And once you've kind of rolled it out a little bit, great. Then you can just kind of do it on the counter like this. Yeah, you can get it longer and kind of more equal. Yeah, kind of more equal. Here, you kind of do it there so that it doesn't stick. Okay, so just pick it up and braid it like you're braiding hair.
How's that?
Glorious. Until you get to the end. And when you get to the end, you just kind of tuck them under, like so. And then you got a reverse braid up here, like this. Okay?